There were multiple Mordekaiser like updates that were started internally that never went anywhere because no one could really figure out like what was Mordekaiser supposed to be. So Xenogenic came along and he was given this idea of like, okay, let's do a Mordekaiser VGU. And he says, okay, Xenogenic, I think more so than any other designer that I have ever worked with or even heard of, had this incredible ability to just call his shot and say, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna do this, and that's where we're going. And with Nunu, that was, Nunu was gonna roll a snowball around the map. He wasn't sure in the beginning how that was gonna work, how that was gonna affect the rest of the kit, but he said, Nunu is gonna be the snowball rolling guy. That's his thing. That's what we're doing. With Mordekaiser, from the very beginning, Xenogenic comes in and he says, we're going to the Death Realm. Like, we're going to the Death Realm. That's Mordekaiser's thing. That's who Mordekaiser is now. And from the very first test, and the very first test had this really bizarre Death Realm version where it was like you spawned a Rise portal around yourself and an enemy, and then anyone who was inside either of the Rise portals would go in the Death Realm, and you'd have like sometimes you would legitimately have a 5v5 in the Death Realm, and it was kind of like, okay, what's the point of the Death Realm in this version? But we knew from the very beginning of working on the Mordekaiser VGU, Mordekaiser is the Death Realm guy. That's his thing. And the question was not, are we doing Death Realm? The question was always, how are we getting to the Death Realm? Exactly what are the rules of the Death Realm? So Xenogenic spent a lot of time working through like, what about this version that's like Kate Ultimate? What about this version that's like Poppy Ultimate? What about this version that you point and click someone and then each person that gets Mordekaiser ulted leaves a Thresh Lantern behind that an ally can click to go into the Death Realm, and there's a 2v2 in there, right? We tried all these different versions, but from the very beginning, we knew what Mordekaiser was. Who he was he was the Death Realm guy. And the really compelling part of this to me was, as someone working on the project, it was so easy for me to know like what was good and what was not, because from the very beginning, it was all about Mordekaiser is Death Realm man. Okay, so things that work with the Death Realm and are good in the Death Realm are good for this champion, and things that don't work very well with the Death Realm are bad for this champion. And so when we added like the Q isolation mechanic, for example, that made a lot of sense, right? Because like, oh, well, in the Death Realm, at that point we figured out you point and click someone and the Death Realm is always 1v1. And so it was like, okay, the Q having isolation damage makes a lot of sense because you're always alone in the Death Realm. So that's like, that mechanic makes a lot of sense. And then the E always made sense. It's like, okay, this is actually fair both in and outside the Death Realm. And so it's like Mordekaiser's way of saying, I'm going to bring you closer to me, but it's not guaranteed to hit in or outside of the Death Realm, right? And it's like all this stuff just made a lot of sense, like Mordekaiser getting speed in his passive and stuff like that. And so he's incentivized to actually fight a little bit before he starts the Death Realm. All this stuff made a lot of sense. It was a really fun project to work on from my perspective because we had such a clear vision of what we were doing and where we were going, even when Xenogenic then handed the project off to Endless Pillows, who finished up some of the spells and like locks down the kit and like added the stat stealing on the ultimate and stuff like that. We had this super clear vision of what Mordekaiser was going to do and who he was going to be.